Good morning, everyone. My name is Raina Ghazi, and I'm the Teacher Development Manager for Macmillan Education International Curriculum. Thank you so much for joining our session this morning with Debbie Roberts, our science author and expert, who will be delivering a session focusing on inquiry-based learning. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to write them in the questions box, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. Pass it over to Debbie now. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be together today. So hopefully what I want to do is share some of my experience and my enthusiasm for inquiry-based learning. So let's get started and look at what my objectives for this morning are, or this afternoon, wherever you might be. It is about really increasing awareness of the advantages of inquiry-based learning, but obviously some of you might be more experienced with inquiry-based learning, so let's look at this as an opportunity to sort of refresh, reflect, and share good practice. Add some things in the comments at the end, and let's share good practice and let's encourage each other. All of these things that we'll look at today are designed to be cross-curriculum. I'm not interested in curriculum today. I'm more interested in inquiry-based learning skills. So we want to provide support for each other, develop an inquiry-based learning environment, share activities, some of the activities that I've designed. Can I just put out there that I've designed these on lockdown? I'm just starting to go into schools now, but certainly not on a regular enough basis to get some resources or use some things from schools. So everything that I'm using today is literally from around my home, from around my kitchen. And so this is open for you to share with parents or to set as little activities for some of your students. So that's the objectives, that's what we're hoping to achieve during this session. So what is inquiry-based learning? Well, if we were in a CPD session now, if we were sat together in a room, I'm sure some of you would be able to offer some insight into what inquiry-based learning is. But we're all at different stages and we've all got different competencies and we're all different in our confidence in developing, designing and delivering inquiry-based learning experiences. So we'll sum it up as we're in inquiry-based learning, we don't focus so much on the content. We focus on the skills that the children can develop through engaging activities. We want to encourage learners to question things. How do learners learn to question? Well, they watch us questioning. They follow our lead. They learn from us. And so we need to develop good questions. They need to develop these good questions. And so they can go away, find out for themselves, carry out research, discover new and engaging activities. We want to allow students to drive their own learning and encourage learners to experience a wide range of learning experiences. And we also want students to take responsibility for their own learning and also reflect on their learning. And often, as they become more experienced, I call this a training process. When children become trained and experienced in inquiry-based learning, they reflect on their own learning. And then they start to ask further questions. They want to learn more. They start to recognise where areas of need are, where they might need more support or more practice. And that's when it's really powerful. This is a maths activity, or is it? So if we use this picture as a stimulus, the starting point of a lesson, what inquiry-based work could you promote from this picture? What ideas? What would you want children to start questioning? They might say things like, where is it? What's the climate like? What country is it? What other animals live there? What other living things live there? Are there many other trees? Do people grow things there? Do people live there? So they might ask a whole range of questions. And this is really important, and we should listen to these. But for a science idea, for example, how do we measure? Well, actually, is that science? That's science and maths. Maths and science often overlap, and over the years, especially recently, curriculum developers have tried to use the same language in maths and science so that children can recognise that we're not teaching two separate subjects, that actually maths is science and science uses maths massively. We also want to encourage the idea that literacy is also part of science. To communicate ideas and to carry out research, we have to have an extensive vocabulary. We have to be able to communicate both through spoken language and also through written language. And so, can you see this overlap? Is it maths? Well, actually, no, it's not. It's maths, it's science, it's literacy, and also it's geography. Where is it? What country is it? What's the country like? What's the climate like? So can you see that intentionally we want to be cross-curricular and we want to promote skills, but actually unintentionally it is cross-curricular. We are the people who make it curricular. We are the people who make lessons into a specific lesson. We categorise lessons into subjects. Children don't. Children see learning as learning. And if the activity is engaging and fun, then they're interested, regardless of what the curriculum says. So questioning, cross-curricular. So you could think of a question about measuring that you could ask students. So thinking about that giraffe, what kind of questions could you ask students? If we were in a room together now, I would set this as a fun and engaging activity to get you to know each other, to actually break down some barriers, get you talking, get you moving around. And I would say, okay, measure, I don't know, measure this room, but you can't use a ruler or any particular measuring devices. How would you do that? What would you do? But when planning, you've got to ask yourself, so if you were setting this as a task, you need to make sure that it will be successful as a task. What skills would you want to encourage from this task? Well, actually, if we set it like the one that I've just described, if we were in a session, a training session together, the most important skill would be communication. It would be collaboration. It would be creativity. It would also be problem solving. You haven't got a ruler. You haven't got a tape measure. So how would you measure that room? You would have to be very creative. You would have to work together to solve that problem, the problem of not having any equipment to measure a room. What prior knowledge would you need? Well, you'd need to know something about measurements. You'd need to understand about kilometres, millimetres, centimetres. Would you measure the height of the room you're sat in now in millimetres? Probably not. And then how would you present your findings? Would it be a verbal presentation? Would you address your class and tell your class your findings? Would you write it down? Or would you draw a diagram? Or would you record it? Would you make a PowerPoint? All these things come into your planning. So why should we plan inquiry-based lessons? Let me tell you, inquiry-based lessons take a lot of planning. But when you're in the classroom, you're in a situation where you are not leading the lesson, you are supporting the lesson. So this means you are not responsible. You are not stood at the front for the whole of the lesson. You are not responsible for their learning. They're responsible for their learning. And so that gives you an opportunity to deliver and to give fantastic feedback, instant feedback, live feedback. You're in a position to move around the room and ask, why have you done that? Why do you think that's the answer? What made you arrive at that answer? What questions would you like to ask me? You're doing really well. Why don't you think about this? Instant live feedback. We're human beings. We love to be praised. This is an opportunity for one-to-one or one-to-small group praise, while students take responsibility for their own learning. Why do we need these skills? We need these skills because we, as educators, are responsible for the next stage. We're responsible for preparing our learners for the next stage in their learning. If we're preparing our learners for university or the workplace, we have no idea what that workplace will look like. We have no idea what they will be expected to do on a day-to-day basis. Technology is moving at an extremely fast pace, and we really can't imagine what the workplace will look like in the future. And so we can't afford to spend time focused on content. We have to focus on skills so that students have the skills, have the toolbox to be able to address any situation that they might come across in the future. I'll give you an example why content-driven lessons will not support students completely into the next level of their learning. A colleague of mine told me a story, and he said that one year he decided to impress his geography teacher, and so he decided to learn every flag of every country in the world, the currency that the country used, and the language that they spoke. Wow, what a feat! What an extraordinary task! What a challenge! Completely useless now, because half of the countries are called something completely different. Borders and boundaries have changed. Currencies have changed massively, hugely over the last few years, and even languages have changed and developed. And so therefore, I would say 90% of that information that he memorized so impressively is obsolete. The skills of him remembering that information, he probably used over and over and over again and became a very successful scientist. So what skills do we need to be developed? Okay, these are cross-curricular skills for life. These are not just for science or maths or literacy. These are cross-curricular skills for life. Now, I haven't developed this list. I developed this list during every session like this. So I'll ask you, if you think something should be removed from this list, or you think something should be added to this list, then that's what I'll do. This is a list developed by teachers for teachers. It's a live list. The list I'm using today is probably different to a list I used last year, because it's a list that teachers think is relevant today. Curriculum changes, subject area changes, we're teaching different things, and so our priorities might change, and so does this skills list. But this is one that's based on the last feedback from teachers. And these are the main skills that we should be planning for. Some of them lean more towards maths than others, some of them lean more towards science, but I think you'll agree that actually we can use these skills in everyday life. Observing and identifying patterns and relationships. Well, if you're looking to rent a new property or buy a new car, you'll look at data, you'll look at patterns, you'll listen to feedback. Sorting and classifying, tidying up your sock drawer, you'll sort and classify and order things. Designing questions. If you want to ask your employer a question, you'll consider it, you'll think about it before you actually go in there and ask the question. These are life skills, but it does change and vary somewhat. So these are the things that in inquiry-based learning, rather than have a subject objective, try to think about a skills objective as well. So focus on the skill, and the content almost becomes an add-on, a subconscious objective that's carried along by the focus being on the skill. It will become clearer, I hope. So what's your role as a teacher? Well, Alison King carried out some research and wrote a fantastic paper back in the late 1980s, and you might think that's completely dated, but actually it's not. And her work is used more and more and more. It's increasingly used by teachers who are developing inquiry-based skills, because what it does is, in a very sort of matter-of-fact way, it tells you what your role is. It actually outlines what a teacher would look like in a good inquiry-based lesson. whatever role you've got in school at the moment, if you were to imagine now, you close your eyes, and when you open your eyes, you're looking into a classroom. Where would the teacher be in this classroom that you're looking into? The teacher will probably be stood at the front of the class. The children will be sat or surrounding, certainly in viewpoint of the teacher at the front of the class, and they will be absorbing information from the teacher. The teacher will be leading the learning. The children will be absorbing the learning. Alison King says that they are the sage on the stage. That's the old person on the stage. Look at me. Look at my audience. I am the oracle. I know everything. Listen to me. Some research says that many teachers go into stand-up comedy. They stand on a stage and they make people laugh. If you're honest and you reflect on this later today or later in the week, compare that sage on the stage. Compare the teacher stood at the front with a stand-up comedian or an actor or an actress, and you can see that actually there are some common skills. The roles are very, very similar. But let's just think about this for a second. We're educated people. How long can children concentrate for? How long can you listen for? How many times are you listening and you find that your mind has wandered off? If you're honest, we can only listen for a few minutes. As adults, we can listen for maybe, I don't know, I think 10, 15 minutes. The research does vary considerably, but I think 10 minutes is it. A child, it's much less, and it depends on the content and it depends on the child. But ultimately, if you're stood at the front of the lesson, teaching, talking for 20 or 30 minutes, what's the point? Pointless exercise. So we shouldn't be the sage on the stage, we should be the guide on the side. When you go to see a children's play and you can hear the teacher at the side of the stage, reminding, prompting, guiding, that's what we should be doing in every single lesson. It's not always possible, but I can't think of many scenarios where one should become experienced and confident and you train the children. I can't think of many situations where being a guide can't be achieved above being the sage on the stage. So the teacher supports the development of confidence, of skills. You need to carefully select the materials, resources. You need to identify which children need more support than others, and you need to consider how are you going to implement this support. This is long-term development. This is not a quick fix. It might take a while. You might have to invest some time to train your children to be independent, responsible learners. But once they've acquired that skill, whether you sacrifice 6 weeks or 12 weeks of their learning, they will be able to learn in that manner for the rest of their lives. They will be responsible. They will have a toolkit of skills that they can pull out and use, whether they're at work, whether they're buying a new car, or whether they're actually revising for an exam. Asking questions is at the very, very core of inquiry-based learning. If you can get a child engaged sufficiently to want to know why, to want to ask how, then you have hooked them. You have hooked them into the content of the lesson. You have hooked them into learning. How effectively do you use questions? Does your questioning promote a deeper thinking? Does it encourage deeper intellectual thinking skills? I'd like you to set yourself a task, and it's an independent task, no one will ever know, and it's for your own reflective practice. Design yourself 4 questions. It could be based on the measuring we did just earlier, or it could be based on a lesson that you're actually planning at the moment. Think about 4 questions that you would ask in that lesson. I have the privilege of working with thousands of teachers from lots and lots and lots of different subject areas, and I always ask them, do you plan your questions? I haven't come across one teacher who said, yes, I do. And I say, for every lesson, yes. And I say, show me your questions. And they generally can't. Because when we become successful teachers, we stop planning questions. And yet, questions are very important in inquiry-based learning and in the promotion of the deeper thinking and intellectual skills. So just consider this for a moment. If we were together in a room now, I would ask you to write this down, and then I would look at all the suggestions and we'd compare them and discuss them. So how many questions do you ask in a day? Now, based on my experience, I know that teachers will say, what do you mean in a day? What happens if I'm not teaching? What happens if it's a day where I only teach one lesson? I bet that happens a lot. What happens if we're in lockdown and I'm not actually teaching a lesson? What do you mean? Okay, I mean in an average day. And I mean how many questions from the moment you become a teacher. So you might have preschool duty. Well, from that moment, from the moment that you are responsible as a teacher to the moment that you're no longer responsible as a teacher, how many questions during that period from start to finish, how many questions do you think you would ask in a day? If you're with someone now, just say, I think it's this, how many do you think it is? And see if you're very close or miles apart, how many questions? Now, whilst you're considering that, I'll tell you that somebody has carried out research into this, and they've followed teachers round and they've used a clicker, biological clicker, I always call them. Not sure if they are, but that's what I see them as. You know what I mean, for counting and recording. Every time they asked a question, click, click, click. And they did this in numerous schools, in secondary schools, primary schools, nurseries, and they followed teachers around and they came up with an average. Let's see how close you are to the actual researched average. It's around 400 questions a day. This research is being repeated at the moment and it still comes out at about 30% of the whole of the teaching day is taken up with the teacher asking questions. This is published research. It was carried out by Stephen Hastings in 2009 and it's still being reported now in 2020, but certainly it was published in 2016, and you can actually look through the archives and you can find that report. The data that's being found at the moment is still around 33% of teaching time is taken up in questions, yet we don't plan the questions. So let's consider, why are we asking the questions? Why do we ask questions? What type of questions do you actually ask? Do you think about when you're going to ask the questions? Do you know when you ask the questions? If you think about a standard lesson that you deliver, at what point in that lesson do you ask a question? And why are you asking the question? Who do you ask the question of? And what do you do if the answer is not what you'd expect? How do you act? Have you thought about this? Have you planned for this? Most people during this research were recorded to ask questions to get attention. So someone's not listening, someone's switched off, someone's off task, and you might ask them a question so that you get their attention back into the lesson. You can check that they've been paying attention. You can check their understanding by asking a content question. So what animal did we discuss earlier on? What picture did I show you? That kind of question. Or we can try to reinforce or revise some topic content through questioning. Do you remember? Think back, that kind of question. Or it could be to increase understanding, to extend understanding. So if that's the case, what would happen if? It could be to encourage thinking, to encourage that deeper intellectual thinking. You could pose a problem and they'd have to solve that problem. But in inquiry-based learning, And if any of you have ever used any of my resources, you'll see that in every single lesson, there are numerous discussion questions. At the heart of inquiry-based are discussion questions. Children learn more from their peers than they do you or me. Developing discussions also enhances a deep understanding of vocabulary. In all subject areas, in all the curriculum I've worked with globally, vocabulary is key, and vocabulary is extending year on year. Some of the vocabulary in maths and science, and some of the vocabulary in terms of verbs, adverbs, and all that sort of thing in literacy have actually dropped down over the years. And someone told me recently, who was a lecturer in literacy, that some of the vocabulary in literacy at primary level used to be A level. Some of the science vocabulary and maths vocabulary, some of the teachers don't actually feel confident to define. Children learn to use vocabulary and define vocabulary through discussion. And so a lot of the questions should be around discussion. Okay. Let's not forget Bloom's. Bloom's is still key. To this day, I will throw out a little caution there. If you do a Google search for the 6 levels of questioning, sometimes you might find 7, sometimes you might find 4, and sometimes they're slightly different. This is still based on the 1956 Bloom's taxonomy. Okay, there are some variations, and some of them say a addition to Bloom's taxonomy, but if you look at curriculum and assessment, it is actually Bloom's 1956 published taxonomy levels that are used. So just be careful. Also, I've seen a lot of placemat things on Google where it gives you the level, so knowledge, and then it gives you suggested words to use in questions or statements linked. They're not always very accurate. So if you read it and you think, that doesn't seem right, it probably isn't, so avoid it. The majority of the questions you'll develop will be understanding, really. If you reflect on it and you look back, you will see that the level that you'll be focused on mostly are understanding, but it's the synthesis questions that develop the deeper intellectual level. And so we should always try to plan these questions. And I do encourage you to plan the questions at the higher up levels in taxonomy, because they're very difficult. The synthesis questions and evaluation, they're very difficult to just think of accurately from the top of your head. And if you only ask one of those questions in every lesson, you are developing that deeper intellectual level, the level that we want children to develop. Okay, so when we're implementing inquiry-based learning, it can also be described as an activity approach. So it's hands-on, it's engaging and it's hands-on. At the heart should be a stimulus, something to engage, inspire, to get them asking those questions. And so it must really be something that they're already confident, they're already experienced with. I once watched a lesson, I observed a lesson, fantastic teacher, and he was showing a video to the children of him parachuting from a passenger airline plane, something that children might go on holiday in. The place where we were working, children didn't really go on holiday. They didn't really move outside the area where the school was. They had no experience of what he was talking about, and he actually was trying to get their interest so he could talk about gravity, but the children were not interested from the start because they didn't understand what was happening, because they'd never been on a plane. And so think about the context of the activity, the stimulus. How will you get them interested and engaged? Yes, you do want something, wow, But if it's so, wow, they've no experience of it, it's not going to stimulate, it's going to have the opposite effect. So how do we improve these inquiry skills? In science, we often think that students need to write an equipment list, think of a method, test the method, collect results, analyse the results, conclude, write future questions. We shouldn't really be doing that. If students are very, very good at writing methods, don't write a method every time. Because what often happens is you start writing a method and it takes up the whole lesson. They might never get onto the inquiry bit. So what's the point? So sometimes give them a method. This also acts as a good model of a method. But that means that they can get straight into an area that they might not be that experienced with, or they might not be that skilled or confident with. So it actually makes sure that they have a rounded experience and they build skills all together, not just in one area, writing a method. Okay, we should try to produce lesson design collaboratively. Especially now during lockdown, lots of us are still in quarantine. Some of us are in less than others, and some of us are back to normal. But a lot of us are still trying to educate children from a distance. Planning some of these lessons can be really time consuming and can be quite difficult. So let's try and do this collaboratively. If each person that you work with planned a collaborative inquiry-based lesson, just one, and you shared them, you'd probably have a nice range of lessons to use with your students. So try to collaborate. Don't just encourage collaboration with the student, encourage collaboration with yourselves and your colleagues. I call this type of lesson planning agenda building, and I've used this with preschool children right up to degree level. So I work with teachers who are either working towards their postgrad qualifications, or they might be working at master's level or beyond. And this kind of lesson planning actually works at all levels. It's never failed me. And in the back of my mind, if I'm planning a CPD training session or something like this, I hold this agenda building technique in my mind. We should always start with an objective. In inquiry-based learning, we're encouraging children to be responsible for their own learning. So it's important that you share the objective with the children. You share what the point of the lesson is with all people who are engaged in the lesson. We need to get them hooked. We need to get them engaged and interested. And this is where the stimulus comes in. And it can be anything, a picture, a piece of music, a video clip, you doing something silly usually works really, really well. I once built my stimulus, which was a bowl of red ink and powder paint, and it splashed everywhere. And I thought, oh my gosh, it was in my early days of inquiry-based teaching. I thought, what am I going to do? The children are on the way, and I've just spilt this everywhere. Well, they loved it. Oh my gosh, miss, what have you been doing? There's blood everywhere. No, it's not blood, it's actually paint. No, miss, look, it's everywhere. And immediately they were interested, they were engaged, they were hooked. My mistake, but a good lesson learned, actually. Sometimes the stimulus is not what you'd think it would be. Be creative, listen to your children, get to know them. What do they like? What really does interest them? Think about what prior knowledge they need. There's absolutely no point throwing them in at the deep end because they won't learn anything and they'll make mistakes. I think about analogies such as bowling. If you took children bowling who've never been bowling before and said, right, there are the balls, off you go. At the worst scenario, someone would get injured. They would pick a ball up and not realise it's actually as heavy as it is, drop it, injury. They might slip on this very, very slippy alley towards the skittles. And so it could be quite dangerous. But actually, from an educational point of view, What will they learn? Would they be able to tell you anything about the game, the rules, the objective? What's the point of it? How difficult was it? Did they improve? No, they wouldn't, because they wouldn't have enough background information or prior knowledge to actually engage in the game sufficiently. So we need to judge our audience. We need to know our children. And I know that's difficult if some of you are still in quarantine. One method to get the children so that you know them, you know the likes, you know the dislikes, you know what makes them tick. Get them to send you pictures, emails. Set up a central school email or Facebook account that's obviously protected and it's safe and secure. Make sure the parents know what they're doing, involve the parents in things like this. But by sending you pictures of what they've been doing this week, or carrying out an investigation, or sharing with their friends at school the results of investigations that you've set, or challenges that you've set, or activities that you've set, you will get to know them, because by their engagement in activities, you will know if they were actually interested and engaged sufficiently in that activity, and then you use that in future planning. So it's still possible, even though we might be teaching from a distance, it's still possible to get to know likes and dislikes and to plan accordingly. So this would summarise my sort of agenda building or my planning technique. What's the context? What are we doing? What's the objective? What skills do we want to develop during this lesson? What do they need to know? What kind of equipment might I need? What resources do I need to develop? What stimulus will I use? How will I get them interested and engaged? How will I get them to start asking questions? And then the inquiry aspect. How will I get them to be interested? How will I get them to start asking questions? What activity will I put in place to encourage and develop that learning, to guide them in that learning journey? I'm going to share some activities with you now, and on the surface of them, you might think, okay, that's great. How am I going to get children to do that at home? Well, show them. Every single thing that I'm going to share with you now has been developed from resources that I've got to hand at home. I call this, and if any of you have any experience in my training sessions or my resources, I call this kitchen science. Absolutely no point in me writing activities that children can't access because they don't have a Bunsen burner or they might not have a calculator. Absolutely no point in developing resources that children can't access. So every single thing I'm going to share with you, children will have access to, hopefully. You might not have access to the exact thing, but there are always alternatives, and I'll share that as well where I can. When we look at these activities, think about how independent can the children actually be? Do they need some support? Are there any health and safety issues that I need to share with the children, share with carers and parents who might be working with the children? Do we need any supervision? Do we need any extra support? Is it a good idea to say to parents, don't do this if you're on your own and you've got the 3 siblings running around? Or, yeah, they can get on this independently. Okay, let's have a look at these activities. So if we look at something like Lifecycles is a big part of all curriculum at the moment. We could observe the life cycle of a frog or a butterfly, and that seems like a real scientific thing to do. But actually, let's produce a timeline. Let's get photographs. Let's download images if we can. Let's copy pictures from books. Let's talk to people, to our friends, maybe online, maybe by phone, maybe by Skype, with the support of parents and carers. Let's share ideas and produce a timeline, drawings, information. Let's describe how the living things change during the life cycle. We tend to use frogs and butterflies because a diary from one of the animals at each stage of the life cycle. So today I'm wiggling around, I'm a caterpillar. Ooh, now I'm stuck in a cocoon and I can't really do a great deal. Yay, and now I'm a butterfly. That kind of thing. Encourage children to develop skills cross-curricular. Does the size of the animal change during the life cycle? Describe the appearance. What does it look like? Record observations. Collaborate, share, send an email to the teacher. Teacher shares it with the class. Share and collaborate from a distance. Plant growth. Most children have access to some kind of a plant, and if they don't, they might have access to seeds. Some of my students recently decided to plant mustard and cress seeds. It was very interesting watching them eat it once they'd grown it. The mustard, yeah, the faces and expressions were very interesting, let's put it that way. But cheap, easy, grass seeds, any seeds, some wheat that they found in a garden, grow it in some soil, and then investigate, does water have an impact? Does it grow well without water? Does it grow well without light? Put it in a cupboard, does it look very healthy? No, it doesn't. That's science. Measure it, observe it, using mathematical skills. Record the measurements, measure them accurately, measure them on a regular basis and record them. Share ideas with others. How well did your plant grow? What did it look like? Did it change colour? Did it look very healthy? And then you can present your findings in a suitable way. It could be photographs, drawings. You could write a report even. Okay, naming plants and animals in a local habitat. I've set up a school near where I live in the UK. They are actually, we're thinking now, oh, it's awful, we're trying to learn from a distance. It's really, really difficult. We set up something, I think it must be a couple of years ago now, and I've got a school in Yorkshire in the United Kingdom, sharing ideas, carrying out experiments and investigations, writing reports, writing diaries, writing about themselves, particularly during this pandemic, and they're actually sharing ideas with a school in the Caribbean, and they've been doing this for a couple of years. So we can collaborate at a distance. We might just have to put a little bit more effort in, and we do have to be conscious of safety. So, share what you're doing with parents and carers. Get everyone involved, taking responsibility for the safety of our children when they're working online. But online is a great way. It's Skype, text messages. They've always got access to a mobile phone. Most children can use a smartphone better than I can. So let's observe plants and habitats in a local area, in a local environment, and compare them with other people. You might want to compare them with your local area. You might go out for your daily exercise to a completely different area, to a grassed area or a beach area. You might live in an area where there's planters or concrete or soil or grass. Compare what they see, describe it, observe, take time to observe what's around them and describe it. Are there many living things? Are there no living things? Are there any animals that are visible? And compare with each other, and then start to think, why? Why are there lots and lots and lots of grass growing in this area and none growing in this area? Why can I see lots of insects here, but I can't see any insects there? And start to think about why that might be. This is a fantastic investigation. I've carried this out with children and adults. I first came across this when I was actually doing an ecological survey. Columbella are the most abundant insect in the world. They are microscopic soil invertebrate. They're described as a free-living omnivore. Sounds like something from the 60s, free-living omnivore. Okay, and they live in leaf litter or the very top layer of the soil. They're not decomposers. They're actually omnivores. They eat other living things. So they're not decomposers. They can jump about 30 times their own height. So that little tail at the back is actually, it works like a spring. So we can talk a lot about mechanics. We can talk about a lot of forces and physics. We can measure it. So we can incorporate maths in there. And this is the way that you collect them. And when I talk about kitchen science, you'll know why. So I might say, right, you'll need a Burley's Tulgren funnel for this. And you think, well, we can't do this. I haven't got a Burley's Tulgren funnel. Really? I thought everyone had one at home, because this is a homemade Burley's Tulgren funnel. Okay, so as you can see, it's a soda bottle. Cut the top off to make a funnel. I've gone outside. I've collected some leaf litter. You might not have leaf litter, but if you collect the top layer of the soil, get a plastic bag, put your hand inside it and scoop with your fingers the top layer, collect it. You need to cover the bottom with some netting. I didn't have any netting, so what I used was one of the packages that you can purchase lemons and limes in, and I've layered it and layered it and layered it to make the holes as tiny as I possibly can. So soil invertebrate like dark, damp places. So once you collect your topsoil or your leaf litter and place it in there, you have got some soil invertebrate in there. I put a lamp above overnight. I put this in my bathroom last night to my son's disgust. Here we go again. What are we growing now? And put the lamp above it. The invertebrate don't like the heat from the lamp. They don't like the light, so they scurry down to the bottom, fall through the netting, collect them in the bottom. I don't know if you can see. It just looks like dust or little bits of gravel. It's not. It's actually invertebrate. Now, if you observe them with the eye, this is great because it shows why we use hand lenses and why we use magnifying glasses. If you use the lens, you will start to be able to pick out. You might be able to pick out parts of the columbella, but not whole columbella. And that means something's gone wrong with the soil. That means it was healthy soil. Columbella did live there, but they've died for some reason. And the columbella tell us how healthy the soil is. So it's really useful to look at that soil. And generally, it's because someone's been put in weed killer, some kind of feed, plant feed, and that kills the columbella. And so it is a really good way to find out how healthy your soil is. Children that can then describe the area where they took the sample from. Is there evidence that the soil is healthy? Are there lots of living things there? Use a quadrat. Tape 4 rulers together. Put it down. Count how many living things you see in that area. Compare it to other areas. So if children are living somewhere close to a beach and other children are living somewhere where there's a grassed area, get them to compare. How come your soil's more healthy than my soil? Why have you got more things growing there than I have? Why did I collect more soil invertebrate than you did? And that's fantastic because they're talking about it and also the sharing and collaborating. Some children love dissection. I know that not everyone does. I actually do enjoy dissection because for me, it brings the human body to life. It brings the animal structures to life. And I think it's because when I was young, I remember someone showing me a heart, a human heart. Well, it wasn't a human heart. It was a pig's heart. I think it was a cow's heart. But anyway, the realization for me that, wow, in a textbook, it's this big. But in reality, it's huge. So for me, I remember that wow factor. And so I like dissection. It's not always possible. It's not always ethical. And it's not always the right thing for your children. And you have to gauge that. But if you can't carry out a dissection, there are absolutely loads on YouTube that are produced by really reliable schools and universities. especially STEM centres, they're pretty good at it. So, you know, have a look, see, does it get them interested? Does it make them want to know how that organ works in that system? They can incorporate mass, we can measure mass without oxygen, mass with oxygen. We'll not go into how you get more oxygen in a lung than not, but I'm sure you can be creative. We can draw diagrams, we can discuss. That's the important bit, we can discuss. Materials is massive in all curriculum at the minute at primary level, sorting, classifying, grouping, using classification keys and identification keys. This is a great way to incorporate geography, maths, science together. It's a different way in literacy to communicate ideas through pictures and diagrams rather than words. Some students, especially those who learn in English as an additional language, it's an opportunity for them to express themselves, to express their understanding without actually using language extensively. So it's a lovely way to incorporate cross-curricular activities. If we can use smartphones, you know, there are some benefits to us being isolated in this pandemic, and that is that in a school it's very difficult to monitor technology. It's very difficult to encourage children to take a picture on a smartphone. It's very difficult for children to carry out research on a computer when there are 40 children trying to log on at the same time. But from home, often they have safer access to smartphones and technology because they're working with parents and carers, and it's easier to monitor. So encourage that and use that experience of researching and finding out for themselves, with you being a guide overseeing what they're doing. Properties of materials, this is a real simple one. Jam jars, containers, plastic cups, cellophane cups, whatever you've got available. Cups, look for different materials, you know, be creative. You might have some foil, cardboard, card, paper. Some children think that different coloured paper conducts temperature in a different way. Think about the vocabulary, conduction. Think about making predictions. Think about measuring. What instrument can you use to measure temperature? How does it work? What units of measurement do we use? Why do we use different units of measurement, temperature? Basically, it's all to do with the scale. So often we use Fahrenheit for some measurements, which is really dated now, but it's because the scale is different to centigrade. So actually, it's all to do with the scale on the thermometer. So again, it's another opportunity for linking cross-curricular ideas and objectives. But the focus for this lesson could be quite simply research. It could be collecting data. It could be communicating data with other people, comparing data with other people. What result did you get for plastic? That's odd, because when I looked at plastic, yeah, but what kind of plastic did you use? I used bubble wrap. I used a plastic piece of cellophane from the food packaging. Why would that be different? What's the difference? There's air in the bubble wrap. So does that actually insulate or does it conduct? Let's investigate it. Can you see where we're going with this inquiry-based learning? It's not about giving information. It's about encouraging questioning and then going away and actually being given opportunities to question for themselves and to come up with tests and investigations to do just that. Soil is really interesting because, again, it links to the health of the soil, the growth of the plant, the amount of living things that live in the area. So yesterday I went out with my little bag and I collected some soil samples. This is fantastic because literally all you need is a plastic bag. Take the children outside, ask them to predict which will be good soil, which will be bad soil, talk about different types of soil, what's in the soil, what makes the soil, how does the soil become soil, what would the earth be like? Let's think about this. Let's write a story. What would life be like if we ran out of soil? Link that to food chains. Without soil, can we grow plants? What would we live on? We're dependent on plants. So the health of soil is extremely important. And link this to environmental science. They test the pH, another unit of measurement. What is pH? They test the content and they carry out samples like this. So once you've collected your soil sample, you can put it in an ordinary container, a jam jar. This is a sauce bottle with a lid. And there's my sample. So I can observe it with my eyes. I can observe it using an hand lens. I can look at the size of the particles. Some are bigger than others. How could I measure them? What unit of measurement would I use to measure that? Can I see different kinds of crystals? There are some shiny bits in there. There are big pieces of stone. There's a piece of a decaying plant. But what's making that soil? So visually, I can see different parts of the soil, but then I can investigate it. So I get my soil sample, I fill it up with water about halfway, so it's half and half really, and I shake it. Grate the kegs, shake it up, make sure it's mixed completely, and leave it and observe it. And you'll be amazed the speed that this reaction happens. So there we are, it's separated out into levels. There's one distinct darker layer at the bottom, which is probably silt. Then there's a lighter area around here, that's probably clay. And then floating on the top, I hope you can see, that's lots of humus or humus. And in there, I can actually see bits of vegetation, and also there are some soil invertebrate in there as well. So that's really healthy soil. So there we should be able to grow things really well, and we should see a relationship between the amount of living things that we've observed there and the quality of the soil. Solids, liquids and gases can be really interesting, but then really quite boring. So when we change state from a liquid water to a solid gas, does the mass change, stay the same, or does it change? This is top pan balance, kitchen scales, and 2 bottles of water, 2 empty containers. You don't even need to go out and buy a bottle of water. You can use your water bottle, fill one up with water, similar one with the same amount of water, same container, one goes in the freezer, measure the mass of both first, one goes in the freezer, one stays out, measure the mass at the end. The point is, if you don't lose anything or you don't add anything, the mass has to stay the same. But children often have a misconception that solids have a higher mass than liquids. We can talk about mass and weight during this, which is a mathematical and scientific massive misconception. We can talk about units of measurement. We can measure accurately using the scales, and we can record it, either communication verbally or a written report. This activity is amazing. When I did this last, a student said to me, "Oh, Miss, why are you a teacher? You could actually be a magician." Praise indeed. What you need for this is a jam jar and a lid, or any container with a lid. That's all you need, or any container and our plate sat on the top. You need hot water from the tap, not boiling water. Don't use boiling water. Hot water from the tap. Ask children, what is a cloud? What is a cloud? What makes clouds? Not many know. It's very difficult to explain. Half fill hot tap water. Take the lid off. Well, you've got it off, otherwise you won't be able to fill it. Ice cubes on the top. My water is now too cool. My ice cubes have melted. 2-3 ice cubes on there. Immediately, you will see the gas particles rise up and you will see a cloud formed. Clouds form in that way from water vapour, but they attach themselves to particles in the atmosphere like dust or dirt or smoke, and that's how you can see them much clearer. So squirt some hairspray in the top or add a lit match and you'll be able to see beautiful, perfect clouds. Forces, can we see magnetism? No, we can't, so it can't exist. But we can see the effects of magnetism. We can stick it to magnetic materials, and we can also measure it using the balance, you will get a reading. Even if you don't put the magnet on the balance, you will get a reading. And that reading is magnetism. And it will change. You'll get a negative and a plus as you change the poles round. This helps a lot of children understand the concept of magnetism. We won't look at circuits, sound and hearing, loads of resources there. You'll get a copy of this and forces using machines as force multipliers. Phew, sorry to rush at the end there. I forgot to look at the clock. Hope that's been okay for you. Very, very quick introduction to inquiry-based learning. Any questions, please feel free. I'd love to answer them. Thanks for your attention.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Debbie, for a really engaging session, some great content and feedback from the attendees. If there are any questions, feel free to write them and we'll do our best to answer those. We've got maybe 2 minutes or so. In the meantime, a few people have asked about certificates, as always. These will be sent within 2 to 3 weeks via email. We have a lot of webinars at the moment, so there is going to be a slight delay to those. And the PowerPoint presentation will also be provided as well. Webinar recordings will also be available on our YouTube channel, so do check out our YouTube channel for really good previous webinar recordings as well. And email us if you have any further questions. I'll just have a look and see if there's any particular questions. Just some great thank yous and how useful the webinar itself is. Just one question, for schools conducting online classes through video conferencing, would inquiry-based learning still be effective?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're collaborating from a distance, so that's one of the top skills that you're already promoting. So just think about whatever activity that you're putting online, think about what inquiry-based skill can I promote here. And if it's recording, research, observing, they are all key skills. And even if you use those every single time, you're still promoting inquiry-based learning. Just think about how to get them to want to learn it for themselves.
Perfect. I don't think we actually have any more questions. So I think what we'll do is we'll leave it there for now. Once again, thank you so much to Debbie. Always insightful, and I love her experiments that she tries out. I was saying in a previous webinar this morning, if anyone does do any of these activities at home, feel free to email us and show us some of the content that you've got. It'd be great to see. And I'm sure Debbie would really like to see those as well. Yeah, so take care everyone, and we look forward to having you join one of our sessions in the coming weeks. Stay so safe as always, and we'll speak to you soon. Bye.
Bye.